semdol ka ke mo fa seda.
And we're live.
Welcome to Talking in Stations, a podcast about EVE Online. I am Matterall, here with Elise.
Hello.
And Baleful Dysmonia.
Dysnomia. Hello.
Just Dysnomia?
Baleful dysnomia is fine.
Okay. I'll get that right.
However you want.
Our engineer, McLeod.
Hey, guys.
All right. As our guest today, we're going to be talking about Providence. We're looking at the Wrecking Crew's leader, Rocket X. How you doing, Rocket?
Oh, good. Thanks for the invite. Much appreciated.
Sure. We're really happy to have you here, actually. Also here is Sado, not pictured. What did he say? Woof.
He's like, oh, Sedo, hi, man. How are you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Not bad.
Okay, and we're expecting some guests from Providence. One's running late, apparently, so we'll try to get them on as well, since we're going to be talking about them. But first, we want to get you caught up on the war and what's going on both theaters, North and the South. Elise, can you help us out with that?
Yeah, a little bit at least. This week was a little bit more action-packed than we predicted. On last week's show, we had some great guests, and they were kind of guessing at what would happen this week. And they all pretty much came to the same conclusion, that the Fountain Theater War would be the one that had the most action, and the Paragon Sol Esoteria, that sort of front would be a little bit more deadlocked. And that was absolutely right. We had a pretty big fight this week. In Fountain, the Initiative and the Imperium together, actually. It wasn't just the Imperium, or it wasn't just the Initiative, it was the Imperium. Ela was there, Asher was there. Had a pretty big brawl. They lost quite a few carriers over a few structures. I think a total of 8 iHubs have been captured, only one that the Initiative really cares about, I suspect. There are a few large citadels now in place throughout Fountain that are being used as midpoints, some Fortizars and Asbels. And I think the one fight that went against Initiative's favor, I think it's like 180 bill or so that was lost to something 20, 30 bill killed. So it was kind of like the first big one. It's not a huge fight, right? We're not talking like BTEC R scale. But it felt really good for the attacking force. The other front of the war, the other front of the war seems to be where the Imperium's paying way more attention. Obviously, they're not using the phrasing of Fountain as a floodplain just yet, but clearly the Imperium cares more about Esoteria, Paragon Sol, and that front around Delve. That has been pretty much deadlocked. Neither side can really make any headway. I think the Imperium is probably creating a few more timers than the Pappy side, but it's still kind of stalled out. It's important to note that in spite of any like territorial losses or gains from one side or the other, the Imperium hasn't lost any numbers. The Initiative, especially, are very happy to go out in fleets the same size from the start of the war. They'll watch a Fountain timer go down as they move over to like the Paragon Sol area and hold that front up. Like they don't care. It's not like, I don't mean to be speaking for them or anything, but they certainly aren't worried, and the early loss isn't feeling or like getting to them at all. So both sides are doing a pretty great job maintaining the morale. But yeah, it's still quite slow going. Fountain is definitely, there are some cracks there. I expect more inroads into Fountain as the week progresses. Obviously, Fountain's a massive region in terms of jump distances, and there's this really annoying NPC area in there as well. So it's kind of hard to do any real damage, right? So you hit that first constellation, then you have to hit another one. And so it's very slow going. It's still very much early days. But inroads from the PanFam side in the Fountain definitely this week, and stalled out front on the other side down south.
couple of things. Can you talk a little more about the geography of Fountain, how it has kind of NPC in the middle of the space? You have kind of a northern and southern part, and strategically what that means?
Yeah, let me just pull up the map. Fountain is actually I was talking to a few people too. It's my favorite region in the game. I don't know why. Probably because this is like the first nullsec region where I started. I was in an alliance called Xero Mortis, and we lived in Fountain. And then we had that taken away from us.
I think partially because I mean I'm living there at the moment. Partially, like I find the enjoyment in terms of fighting in Fountain is like geography actually means something in Fountain. Whereas like if you go to like drone regions and stuff like that, like it's all so densely packed together that like the geography doesn't really mean too much, whereas in Fountain it's kind of split between northern Fountain and southern Fountain, right? And there's a bit between the middle where you kind of fight, like if you're invading like north south or south north kind of thing, you've got this like area where you can kind of fight in order to actually get to slowly progress north or slowly progress south. But you also have this this big kind of gate between CTAC-N and KVN, which is kind of like almost like a headshot situation, right? If you're able to control one or the other or both of them, then you basically have access to both north and south, and you can kind of dominate from there. But it's a geography thing, right?
So when we talk about geography, it's not just like the jump gates themselves. It's actually the jump ranges that are quite spread out. So the southern part, the area near Iridia, no one really uses that for anything. People who have lived in Fountain don't really use it for anything. There are moons there. It's important to have jump bridges and stuff like that, so you can go through to Losec for your industry needs. But really, it's kind of just like this empty, fallow space within Fountain, if you will.
Iridia is like the worst region in the game.
Yeah. And then over on the other side, right? So Fountain is flanked with Losec, Iridia on the bottom. And then over here, you've got Delve, which obviously quite important. And, you can't get into Delve from Fountain through jumping, or you have to take the gate. So you can't just live in Y-2 and then jump through. It's kind of problematic. And then on the other side, you have Cloud Ring and Outer Ring, which they're NPC nullsec regions that people don't really live in. At least large alliances or medium alliances don't really live in because they're kind of crummy in terms of TrueSec and what they offer. So you just have like this lots and lots of empty space around you. And then smack in the middle, you have the Serpentis who decide that they're going to live there too. So there are NPC stations. There's, I think, 4 NPC stations. There's Serpentis Prime, WY, and then a few other ones that I'm forgetting. But that's, where a lot of people also base out of because they run missions there. I think the Bulgarians and the Hungarians, ethnic groups in EVE Online, have lived there since I've been playing EVE. I don't know, maybe there's like some cool lore thing there that they want to go for. They always seem to be there, and they've always seemed to be there. They're still there now. I was talking to a few of them. But Fountain is definitely a tough nut to crack, and there are many layers to it when you're trying to invade it. The historic downside of Fountain has been its geography, because it's in this secluded little corner of space. It is hard to get to, so that's great when you're the defender, but it's hard to go anywhere else from that region. The way the initiative has kind of gone around this is they've used wormholes quite a bit. So they can kind of escape this corner of space that they're living in. And they also have the entire Imperium jump bridge network, so they can get around the map and even access more of the world.
We went one further than that, in actual fact, at least. We, at some point, we actually started seeding Cloud Ring with wormhole generators to generate more wormholes for us.
Oh, that's how you did it.
Yeah.
Because you guys gave Test a lot of grief through those wormholes.
I think we gave a lot of people a lot of grief. I think that was one of the reasons why a lot of people had a lot of hate.
It seems like some of the anger for this war comes from a lot, basically fraternity, during the fraternity and Legacy war, there was a lot of interference from Pando's bomber fleets that were coming in from those wormholes. I could be wrong. Sedo was there at the time.
So we should be live again, but I don't know how good this is going to be. The internet's being a bit kind of funky today. Bear with us, and
The
apologies for
clouds might be flaring up. Oh.
that.
It seems to be working. So that's good.
All right, let's go back to what we were talking about. We were talking about the war, and there was something of a really interesting escape, wasn't there, with ProGod? What was that about?
Oh, and they're in the pause.
Yeah. Rocket,
So
did you hear?
Rocket might know a little bit more. I think he must have been.
Yeah,
But
I watched all 3 videos on Reddit. So
Makes me
basically,
an expert.
from what I can, very versed. I've seen 3 different perspectives, some with music, some with comms. Get the variety out there. But so basically, ProGod was sat in a small pause that had been reinforced, had like 9 hours left, and then for no real apparent reason, Imperium starts sinoing in just off the tower, brings in a subcat fleet, and then follows up with fax. And what I can only assume is Hordreds. Then Bubble, like, rape cage is the pause. That was the expression we used to use back in when pauses were a thing. Bubbles it, stops the fleet, or they think it stops the fleet leaving. ProGod realizes that he can basically keep their entire fleet occupied while their allies win the Entosis timers. So he pretty much asks the fleet if they're happy to sit there. They say, yeah, no problem, and they sit there for the entire op. Win the objectives, the allies win the objectives, and then ProGod tells everyone to align to the outgate. Prop mods on, hits the edge of the bubble, tells them to overload. They all burn straight out of the bubble and all walk to the outgate, and then put bubbles on it to stop them being followed. So a pretty clean extraction with like 300-400 people on grid from what I could see. And they lost like 4 ships getting out. So there's lots of like Benny Hill music and things like that going on right now.
usually when there's
and rightfully so, it was quite a good thing to see, quite amusing.
Usually when there's a great escape like that from a pause or something, I always assume that, one of the tried and true kind of strategies is you reset the pause password and just starburst everyone out in a random direction at super fast speeds. You hope your ships can slow down fast enough and you book it to the gate. That's chaotic. But ProGod strategy in classic ProGod form was burn in a straight line and go real fast. And it works. It worked perfectly. I was quite amused by this whole thing.
Well, sometimes you just got to do the thing that's not expected. They're like probably expecting the password to be reset or something.
It's one of those things where that ProGod gives the order to like overload prop mods and walk to the gate, and then sits there with like a huge shit-eating grin on his face, like no one else in the world could do, right?
Yeah. I think this is the kind of thing that makes a player famous, actually. Like when you can achieve success as an FC for your guys, especially against odds, which ProGod has done quite a bit. He's kind of built a career on that. Early on, that's what he did against Pandemic Legion. You guys at least that's what he told us. I don't know if we were actually winning, but he told us we were winning. This is what makes you like someone that people talk about. So getting him out of this, getting his group out of this situation where they're trapped, and doing it with, it looked like remarkable ease. That's what makes you a legend, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, this is kind of like the narratives that are shifting in the wars. So like from a big scale, the Test and Legacy and Pappy side, they've kind of dialed back the goon swarm or the game killing enemies of the server, and more like we're the plucky dudes who can outfox the big bad guys, right? So that's sort of the motivational tactic that at least Legacy seems to be using this front, and it's working. It's working incredibly well. I would say looking back at last week's show and all right, so back to my point. I was looking back at last week's notes. I said a really long spiel while we were offline that everyone was probably bored by. That's probably why the servers went down and stuff. But TLDR, Headliner was right in his predictions of what would happen this week. If you look at last week's show and listen to Headliner's predictions, he was right. I think he's cheating a little bit because he gets to decide what happens in a large part of things. So he's a bit of a cheater, but I mean, cheaters can be right too. Either way, both sides pretty motivated.
Hold on, Elise. Have to call cut again because the popping. Okay, I want to thank you guys for sticking around, those of you that did. And we were going to continue now in a minute. I'm going to give it just a minute here. With Providence. Okay, yeah. Yeah, we're not going to be able to carry video at this time because we get that crackling noise. So if you're watching this...
It wasn't me eating like in front of the microphone. A little bit more
That's
decor.
the story, and you're sticking to it at least.
Yeah.
Bag of potato chips. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll end up looking at the map because that's what we're going to be talking about anyway as we talk to our next group of guests. But just wrapping up. Actually, we shouldn't wrap up because it will have to be edited up. But we will come to you next week, all week, talking about the war, so you can get war updates then. And we will keep you informed on all the stuff. It's slow moving, but if Elise, help me with this. If you had to define the war in the first week versus the second week, we're now 2 weeks into it. What would you say are the themes?
So the first week was a lot of posturing and like drawing lines in the sand a little bit, trying to get people situated, making sure everyone's on the same front and organizing different groups. So it's very, very coyish when it came to actually attacking. The second week, you kind of see a little bit of movement. Both sides are kind of at full steam ahead. You see the Imperium focusing on the southern area, including all of their fleets. And you see Fountain slowly, very, very slowly giving way. It seems like Imperium is using that as just a stall tactic to see how much headway they can make. So now we're kind of completely in the throes of it. Still, people are being a little bit cagey. No one wants to have that first huge, utter defeat. But both sides, full steam, full bore ahead.
Okay. All right. So now let's move on to something we wanted to talk about. We've been talking about it during the week. We've talked about it about less than a month ago, and that is Providence. So I want to welcome, again, Rocket X, Sado, and we also have from CVA, Kyle Saltz. How are you doing, Kyle? We didn't introduce you at the beginning. How are you now?
Doing very well, thank you.
Awesome. Can you get us up to date on some of the events that have happened in the last few weeks?
Well, where to begin? As always, Providence is always very hot. A lot of stuff happening. So, more specifically, what are you looking for?
Why don't you talk about R3 TAC 7K7? You said that was a big system.
Yeah.
Lost.
Yes, we did. We lost R3. We lost several systems. More recently, we had a kind of like what the judge did to his own people. We had the same thing happen with Care Factor. It was an unfortunate part, but Care Factor recently had a friend of the well, his main is in PL, but he talked to the leader of Care Factor and asked to come back, help try to rebuild Care Factor. He was given roles, probably shouldn't have, and he pretty much betrayed them, flipped the SOV, destroyed all the TCUs, iHubs, transferred a lot of the Citadels over to Wrecking Crew, and that is something that's happened, which was a pretty big blow for us, like I say, morally speaking.
All right. Well, let's contextualize it a bit more. Providence, have you been under a certain amount of pressure over the last few months? Has it been unusual, or is it always like this?
It's always like this. I mean, we've been at war for 2 years and 8 months. I mean, it hasn't stopped. And I know that some guys say, "Oh, we're not at war. We're not at war," but that's just something because we haven't been killed yet. People will say we're not at war because we haven't won. But it's been a war. We've been fighting nonstop. We have timers every weekend. Big, we're having I wouldn't say large fleets, but we're having upwards between 400 or 500 people fighting every weekend, up to maybe over 1,000 if you want to bring in like bat phones and stuff like that.
All right, who are you at war with?
We are at war with Wrecking Crew, which is a coalition of pirates. Historically speaking, Wrecking Crew traditionally used to be super hunters. They're in this channel, so they could probably explain better for themselves. Originally, the war was fought between PL, NC Dot, and they started bringing in people like Wrecking Crew, which was originally like Honorable Third Party, Purple Helmeted Warriors, Arton was there. Over time, Wrecking Crew's been able to develop a group such as like the Rogue Consortium, which is a great group of guys, but unfortunately they're on the wrong side of the fence, I think.
Former CEVA, aren't they?
No. Now, what TRC actually was originally a former Care Factor. They had some disagreements with the leadership there. They asked for us to intervene, and I'll be honest with you, and I've even told them a long time ago, they got a raw deal a long time ago. No, I haven't, we admit this. This isn't something new. I've talked to them about it. I wish I could wave a magic wand and make everything all better, but people want to, this is the stance that they want to fight with. But moving forward, they kind of use it as a kind of a propaganda piece. We were wronged by Provi, XYZ. Now, over the last couple of years, I have bent over backwards to just try to make sure that whatever happened to TRC never happens to anyone else. I mean, because it's absolutely, nobody wants to have something bad happen to them like that. They've progressed pretty well, I have to admit. Now, moving forward, they've had other groups like.
I think your pizza's ready. What is that?
Pardon?
Is that your phone?
Oh, sorry, that's my phone. Sorry, I'm at work right now. I'm not turning it off.
Are you a cop? Because I hear like. Just kidding. All right, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm in a paramilitary law enforcement agency that protects special nuclear material.
Are you in Portland?
No. Whoa.
Okay. Could you tell me if you were? Yeah. All right. So RC got a bad deal, and they ended up moving in.
No,
sorry,
TRC.
TRC, the Rogue Consortium, got a bad deal, broke off of Provi, ended up taking residence in Provi as part of Wrecking Crew, which is a different group, but they are. Well, tell us about Wrecking Crew, Rocket X.
So, as Kyle said, we started out as kind of just super hunters, and then kind of realized that we could go and drop blops and occasionally a few caps on Provi, just like guerrilla and skirmishing shit, really. There's like a 2-year kind of history there as well, which kind of starts with Provi helping Snuff try and shoot our keep star, and kind of comes up all the way to today with many ups and downs along the way. But now kind of recently things have kind of fallen out of balance in the region. We've kind of tried to keep the conflict in some form of equilibrium. Really, where there's been problems, it's been since so Blackout was the first thing, because originally we just had YMP and YQB after the PL invasion, but Blackout caused a lot of problems for Provi. In terms of their kind of line members, because a lot of Provi's dudes that you see in fleets are just the guys that go out and rat and they do their thing and they show up to defend their space, right? So when Blackout hits them, on our side, right, we live in low sec. Wrecking Crew is formerly a low sec group, and most of us live in low sec and stage from there, which means obviously Blackout we didn't care because it didn't affect low sec at all. Whereas Provi's kind of home space where they make money and stuff was completely kind of blacked out, and obviously they realized that we realized that we could run rampant in Provi and they couldn't scout us unless they had people on every gate, right? So Blackout caused a few Provi systems to fall simply because their ADMs dropped, and it pushed it towards US time zone. There has been a big thing with time zone tanking. All of Provi's structures were EU, and the US time zone was much weaker. So all our structures are timed USTZ. It kind of produced that in the sense that while ADMs were high on both sides, neither could make any progress. So Blackout kind of broke that stalemate, and then we took a few systems with timers at either end of the ends of the window. But once Blackout ended, Provi recovered its numbers. We were kind of going back and forth, and that was the kind of period where like we were dropping like 50 dreads on each other and supers and God knows what, right? Several fights that went into over 100 billion, 150 bill across both sides. Either way, we didn't win them all by any stretch. We paid out a lot of SRP, so as I'm sure Provi has as well. But then we kind of get to spooling up to kind of World War B here. Now, what had happened basically
you mean the current war? The current war is happening now?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So we were getting to a point where Wrecking Crew was still growing, and we were hitting Provi pretty hard. And it got to a point where they couldn't, they were going to struggle to deal with us in USTZ again, outside of Blackout, because our numbers were growing. So they kind of involved Legacy in the conflict, and that's where all the bat phoning started, with like us bringing in like Horde and Volta and PLNC, etc. For big timers, and then bring in Legacy. So that all kind of happened, and then the kind of bat phoning, as Wrecking Crew got bigger and bigger, we figured that we could kind of take more stuff on our own. So we kind of started to dial back on it. Obviously, as kind of World War B2 starts to be a thing, then like Legacy is no longer in the area and can't really support Provi in the same way that they did before. So we're there, like having built up like this force to fight Provi and Legacy combined in US time zone, and then Legacy's goes off to war. Right now, obviously, we're involved in that war as well on Legacy's side. But really, it's just meant that kind of the political landscape has left Provi in a really tight position. And the R3 fight for the iHub, we tried intosising KBP, but that was kind of, we did it a few times. The first time we did it ended up in like a 180 bill fight or something like that, where Provi got a lot of its carrier fleet tackled off at range off a gate, and they couldn't extract them. Got defanged as well. And then, I mean, at this point, bearing in mind, they were outnumbered like 2-1 as well. So what happened was we basically jumped the gate into them, but we lit the sinos directly on the gate and jumped through. So they had really no idea how many people we had, because as people poured into one system, they jumped the gate and go through into the next one. So we poured like twice as many people as Provi had through it, and they just lost grid control really quickly and couldn't extract, and lost a lot of carriers. Gian, to you.
I gotta admit, that was an incredibly messy fight. So yeah, I mean, as you said, we didn't actually. I mean, we did. I mean, hello. Yeah. Yeah. So regarding that fight, I mean, as you said, we weren't. I mean, we had an idea of how much you'd brought. I mean, we had a rough idea that you're just bringing friends, and obviously we had some legacy groups with us, but we weren't quite sure exactly how many were actually coming through. Hence why we dropped a range, and then obviously, well, Provi being a group that doesn't really experience tie-dye that much, and not really being used to fighting in that sort of environment. Obviously, we took the carriers at range, and then we were trying to get dreads sorted to deal with your factors, but of course, too little, too late, pretty much.
Once again, because I was muted as usual, Gian Ball is from CVA. Sorry, he's not from CVA, but he is from Provi Bloc. He is an FC there.
Yeah, I mean, that was the kind of first time we reinforced KBP on the request of Siege Green, who just wanted a timer, and like, you know what Koreans are like, that alarm clock at 3 a.m, and none of them will care. They'll be perfectly happy to do it. So they always show up when they come down with like 70, 80 max sort of thing, which is, you know, a big thing. But I mean, it worked fine for that fight, because obviously Provi committed to a grid, and then we could have a big one grid. But generally for a soft fight, that doesn't happen. So next time we reinforced it, Provi, we made the decision that instead of fighting under jammers, we wanted to go in and try and escalate and drop the hammer. So we went in early with Max and reinforced the jump bridges in those systems and killed the Sino jammers in time for the timer. But the problem was then that, I mean, we had like 130-man Mac fleet, and Siege Green had a 100-man Mac fleet as well. And we were just too immobile, and Legacy and Provi basically started to run rings around us, and, you know, would pile like 150 munins and kill our Entosis facts before we could get anywhere near them to defend them. So we realized that we weren't going to get the kind of fight we wanted and went home. From that, we basically realized that if we actually wanted to try and force, because at this point we knew that Provi had realized they could win the objective without actually fighting us, which is, when you're faced with that number and kind of the grid controlling power of 300 Macarials and then the cap escalation, you don't fight on a grid. And from their perspective, it was a brilliant adaptation to the kind of meta that we were pushing at them. So for R3, the actual goal was to take GTAC 5, but RC had never really done an Entosis thing before and actually aimed to take SOF and actually committed to it. So we always just had one fleet, and as you'll all know, you need like an anti-toaster fleet and toasters and eyes and sinos and recons and God knows what, right? We never had any of that. So R3 was kind of our practice run. So we only reinforced the iHub and didn't bother with the TCU, thinking that we probably wouldn't win it anyway. It caught Provi quite off guard, and they weren't really able to do anything about what we'd done because their anti-toasting tends to be like jackdaws at range.
Yeah. Just like to interject there. So regarding that R3 loss, one of the primary reasons why the Provi defense wasn't, I'm not trying to blame anyone, but one of the primary reasons why the Provi defense weren't quite up to par as what it was is because an older FC who had recently just come back to the game, who was trying to prioritize fights, essentially took over the fleet. And obviously, whilst we had FCs like Arc who were experienced and knew how to take advantage of these timers and just focus on actually the toasting game. Obviously, the FC that just came back was focusing more on the fighting and less so on the actual objectives, which is why I'm assuming on your side you was most likely surprised at how easy it was actually to win the timer.
We didn't lose a single node. But yeah, we did notice that the Provi had committed to the kind of fight rather than the objective. Normally Provi will kind of try and go for the objective so that they know that even if they lose the fight, they retain the objective. But in this situation, the guy just went balls in, and that was it, kind of thing. But once the iHub was done, we then had a problem because super low ADM, right, and 7-8 hour window, and the guys that had owned the iHub were having to guard it to stop people like Marth and Argyle going and toasting the damn thing every time. So there's a whole list of Marth Ibis losses in system where he's just been troll toasting, and that was annoying to deal with. So we made the decision that rather than just go straight for GTAC 5, we'd try the R3 TCU and then make it a capital. So we took that the following weekend, and the toasting tactics we used the first time worked just as well as they'd done before. The following week, we went for GTAC 5, and it was actually us. It wasn't a practice anymore. It was full on. Let's go take the system. So during that week, we reinforced a normal Fortizar in R3 with the intent to try and time the soft timers for the same day. And as it happened, the timing couldn't have been better. So we had this R3 Fort timer one side of Provi, and then GTAC 5 the soft timer the other side of Provi. Now, when we got there, the plan was basically just to try and keep DPS on the fort, keep it paused, and keep the fight in R3 while our toasters did the work the other side. And we had Slippery Pete Tengus to counter Provi's jackdaws and kill enemy toasters, and then our own guys were running we used a subcap, a Baden or something to start the timer and to avoid the capital kind of warm-up cycle, which is ridiculous. And then we use a fax paired with it, and if we're worried about bushes, we'll use two and scram each other and all that sort of stuff. So it meant that the jackdaws couldn't really do a lot. Provi really, again, with this fight, fully committed to the fort, really, and our toasters went uncontested for most of the iHub timer, and the TCU would have come out slightly later. But when we got to R3, we ran into a problem, and it was pretty much that Snuff had appeared from nowhere, and they had 7 or 8 long range dreads, tracking fit dreads, and we were in Artimax trying to sit at 250k, right, and plink as much as we could without being in too much range of the fort. So we knew that we couldn't risk getting webbed and painted by the Provi fleet, which was in Munins, around about 140 or so. And then get blapped by these dreads. So we made the decision to literally warp above the fort, plink it, pause the timer, wait for Snuff to reposition on the fort, and then ping again so that they were again out of block range for the dreads. But we kind of expected Provi to take the fight because we were in range of the fort, and we kind of expected Provi to just like tackle us, pin us down, and then Snuff would reposition. But I don't think the Provi FC wanted to kind of start the fight without Snuff being in range.
I was sort of hoping the same outcome. However, I wasn't the lead FC on that one, unfortunately.
So,
I personally believe we could have quite easily won that fight, and by extension, essentially been able to reduce your ability to actually defend the GTAC 5 timer if we had basically made our way over there. Because my entire thing of that was, okay, let's just commit what we can to kill that fleet. If we lose a bunch of shit, oh well. Then let's just make the way over to GTAC 5 and hope we have enough. Shit happens.
As a bystander, completely not involved in this, I'm shocked at just how involved the fighting has been. And just one thing that I noticed that I find very funny is that Providence or Provi Bloc habitually over the years have always managed to not use their best assets, right? So as these guys are dissecting different huge pivotal fights, Gian is like, yeah, well, I wasn't in charge because someone didn't let me, and he knows all the right things to do here, and instead probably put forth someone who maybe isn't as experienced just because.
Now that's not.
I'm not trying to say like who like ran the thing was less experienced. I mean, he's a really cool dude and he's a good FC. It's just, I mean, when you're running. Of course, I mean, as anyone here can probably attest, when you're running a fleet, you have a much different viewpoint to someone who's, say, I don't know, like in that case, I was more of a secondary FC, and of course, I mean, I most likely had a much easier time basically seeing the bigger picture of what's going on, whereas he was dealing with a lot of other shit. Although like. As you said, I mean, in hindsight, for most things, I think it could have. I think what I was wanting to do was essentially the right thing, but obviously, I don't really blame him for wanting to take things cautiously. Because I mean, I mean, as has been said, we've been in a very tight position recently in Providence, so it's been a sort of case of trying to not lose too much. Whereas, I mean, obviously, in that sort of case, I was sort of in a position where I'd sort of already done the math in my head and was like, okay, yeah, we lose. Even if we lose half of our fleet here, it means our seed has to go all the way back to Kamal, completely reship and try to defend by the time we've contested their G5 timer.
We had the possibility that, I mean, because the thing is, once we knew Snuff Dreads were there, right, and the long range Dreads and the Scorp Navies, we knew that if we got caught in the middle, we'd be absolutely fucked. And with an A fleet, we're not going to get out if that happens.
Well, one of the things regarding the Snuff fleet was, like, one of the reasons why we weren't engaging was the worry that we'd get separated from the Snuff fleet, whereas I was sort of sitting there like, okay, well, I mean, if we just go on max with 150 Munins at 0, there's going to be plenty of time to actually reposition the Scorp Navies. I mean, it doesn't take more than 30 seconds to get a faction battleship fleet in a warp. I mean, like again, I'm not trying to shit on anyone. I'm just saying, like what I personally was wanting to do. But, I mean, I understand it wasn't my fleet, it wasn't my call.
I'm just trying to. I didn't mean any disrespect at all. Just like a habitual thing that happens with Providence. You see names like Makalu Zaraya, Core Blood Brothers, Jintan, like all these people come up through the ranks of Providence, and in one way or another they feel slighted in terms of what they're allowed to do, and they end up leaving because of frustration. So it just, when I hear this, it has similar echoes. I'm not saying it's the exact same thing, but similar echoes to that, where very accomplished, very like tactically sound people don't always get to make all the calls.
Okay, we're being kind of disingenuous here because the individual that in question is an actual veteran FC of Providence. He has actually led multiple fleets in which we've absolutely crushed it, RC with it. And so, the gentleman took some time off, came back. He is a trusted FC, and this is hindsight's 2020. So him making a bad call, and then we're just like, eviscerating him, saying, oh, he's a bad FC. No, he has a history of absolutely dunking RC. He's lost some, absolutely, yes, Who hasn't lost or won one?
Good, Kyle. No one was saying it was a bad FC. We're just
Well, they were saying that we're traditionally putting people that aren't a good FC in there, and that's just untrue. I mean, for most of these,
that was what he was actually getting at. I think what he was getting at basically was that there's people that have kind of proactive ideas and want to do things differently and change things up. It wasn't anything really to do with Ark, because as you say, I mean, Ark has been a fantastic FC for Provi for a long time, and he is very competent. So this was more in relation to kind of like the position that people like Jintan and Makalu, etc., found themselves in, where they kind of get to a point where they're ready to do more stuff and change things and be proactive, and it kind of doesn't get off the ground, and they get frustrated and leave. And it kind of, Lisa's right, probably does kind of have that kind of feeling from the people that I've spoken to as FCs and stuff like that. I mean, I know some FCs won't see it that way, so by no means is it the majority of it. By no means is it even, you couldn't even call it a minority. It's just a few individuals over a period of time that have done like very well, and are up and coming stars, and they need to be kind of put in a position to both control the direction of the group they're part of, both in terms of kind of content and also the diplomacy side of it as well, because you can't these days in Eve, you can't run an entity and not be aware of the political situation that surrounds you, given the geography of the area you live in. So like to kind of not converse with anyone and not be open to change and make deals and do things like within your own entity, like group SRP and things like that, it does become very difficult to survive. And a lot of these kind of players that have been up and coming and have been bright stars within Provi and have had a lot of potential, kind of get burned out and frustrated and kind of, don't come back. There's a lot of people. I mean, Valcorsia as well, if you know him, he doesn't like Provi anymore, and that was because although he wasn't like he wasn't mega known as an FC in Provi from what I'm aware, but definitely kind of leadership and got a political head on his shoulders, right? The guy knows what he's doing, and he just didn't gel with Provi leadership's decision either. So I mean, I think it is a thing, but it's not a slight on Ark at all, mate, honestly, because I mean, Ark's a good dude, like we all know that.
But what is the larger theme here? Because we're talking about individual fights and how expectations weren't met, or things could have gone differently. And this hasn't been a blowout this entire time. It's been a rough back and forth. But what are the larger themes of what brings us to Providence today? And then we should talk about what's going on with Providence today.
Really, like what's brought us to kind of this point is the fact that RC has grown to a point where we can now match Provi in any time zone and contest on timers. So although Provi still controls the majority of the region, the kind of military power in the region is RC's ultimately. So
you've gotten the upper hand.
I think Provi really has just recently realised that as kind of line member level. I mean, there's been a lot of FCs, and this is again going back to the whole kind of Jintan kind of issue. A lot of the Provi FCs have kind of known that this has been a thing for a while, and they've been concerned about it. Others haven't, and it kind of got brushed under the rug until we reach this point where it's really kind of too late for them to naturally fight and win against us without kind of being given some time for release, which is why we now have an invasion pact with them for the next 2 months.
Non-invasion pact.
Yeah, so there's a few different assets to it. One is kind of like no cloaky camping, so that we're not suppressing each other's ADMs. Our line members can make money. Like stop grief reinforcing jump bridges, so we will still reinforce them if it's related to a timer or like a structure fight or something like that. But we wouldn't just grief them by reinforcing their jump bridge every day, which we have been doing. And then we've written off any kind of fort or upwards structure fight, so it's literally going to be Athenors, Astras, and what have you. Yeah, and no Sov war.
How did this come about?
So my thing really is that, like, this didn't start out as a war. It has become one, undoubtedly, and I will say that, and it's stupid to deny it, right? I think like we all know that. But I mean, it started as a content thing, and then as kind of the history of Provi over. I mean, this is 2 years of history that's led to this point, and like I say, it goes way back to the Kamal Keepstar and a lot of things that have happened since then. We offered Provi a deal in April, which was initially similar to the current one. But after we reinforced GTEC 5 the first time, Provi seemed pretty confident that RC was going to fold in 2 weeks. So we retracted the majority of the deal and then left no AFK Cloaky camping on the table and said, let us know what you want to do. And basically we were told no, they didn't want to do it. So we basically said, okay, well, like, you know, you don't like what content looks like, you call it a war, then well, let's make it a war and actually start hitting you. So since April, we've kind of turned up the heat and been max forming and, 200 dudes every weekend for timers and stuff like that. Now Provi kind of line member understanding has evolved to a point where they realize the kind of threat that RC has been for a long time. But because leadership really didn't do a massive amount about it earlier on, it kind of spiraled for them.
I mean,
it's under control.
Regarding the leadership thing, I mean, obviously, it's a blanket statement, but I don't really want to say too much because I don't want to get in fucking trouble with people. I mean, there's quite a few of us that have sort of understood the threat and have sort of been seeing the way things are going since like a year ago.
So,
and I mean, it's been a sort of case of trying to just get any compromise possible to sort of make the situation easier. Because I understand that that a lot of people are obviously proud and don't really like the idea of having any sort of agreement with RC because, I mean, for a lot of people, it's sort of seen as a sort of moment of weakness. However, I mean, in my eyes, it's less about pride or weakness and more about understanding when you need a break. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, as we said on the show the other day, when you're fighting a war for 2+ years constantly, whether it's defensive or offensive, it's incredibly fatiguing. And when you're fighting a group like RC, who's on the offensive, that's constantly snowballing, constantly picking up more people, and especially when RC is sort of built upon a core of people that are a lot more experienced, have a lot more SP and a lot more risk, compared to a group like Provi that's primarily built more intensively on just having more numbers to deal with stuff, it does get incredibly overwhelming. Because obviously, as Rocket said, we're at the point now where RC is able to form similar numbers to Providence, if not more, than on occasional ops. But of course, the majority of those numbers are at a much higher level in terms of skill and capability.
Right. Let me jump in here. Make room for Baleful. Were you going to say something?
yeah, I was going to ask about the pact that you guys made with No Sav War. Is the goal of that just to get the each other off your backs during the World War B, or is it because that the Sav really isn't the goal of RC?
Sob's never really been our goal. So, I mean, the war kind of for us in terms of our involvement in it, we're kind of we've installed jump clones out in Iridia next to kind of regional gates and stuff. And our plan generally is to work with some of the kind of smaller groups that are involved in the conflict and then do what we've kind of done in Provi, but join kind of our Blops hunting network.
Well, I know you guys hang out a lot in Relic, so is it just Provi's proximity, or were they chosen because you specifically want the fights with them? I know you said there was the one group that was in Care Factor that had bad blood between them and Provi. Is that kind of the general gist of why?
So this is the kind of history part of it. So it goes back to, like I say, the Kamal Keepstar. So in short, Snuff came to shoot Kamal's Keepstar, so ours, and so the way they did it was Provi dropped a fort in one of the systems that we hunt in, and basically used it as bait to try and drop us with Snuff. But we saw it coming, and we did lose a fair bit on the trying to stop it anchoring. But the next day, Snuff reinforced our fort Azar and Provi kind of sided with them. So we were like, well, we were having good content. It was nothing really big at the time. We weren't actually kind of pushing Provi at all. It was just hunting and dropping and that sort of thing.
Right.
But yeah, they sided with Snuff.
And that
that meant that we, because after it repaired, I said to EQ, like, well, it's kind of a shame because if Snuff had come and shot your keep star, we would have helped you defend it. So what the fuck? And offered him that moving forward. And he said that we'd already done like 200 billion ISK in damage in Provi in the last like year or so. And he wasn't prepared to kind of have a discussion on it and wouldn't do that in the future. So I was like, okay, well, we'll see what happens in a year, right?
Yeah, that initial Snuff thing, I mean, as I've discussed with you, it triggers me so fucking much. That was not a... again, I don't want to say too much because obviously I don't want to get in trouble, but that was not exactly a smart move in terms of probably politics. It's something I fought heavily against.
Okay, so let's just bring people up to speed on where we're at. There is just kind of a content arena in Providence between Wrecking Crew, which Rocket X is the head of. He has Sado, who's joined him, and they're fighting against Providence. It's just a local thing. It starts to get more intense and more heated. It becomes basically an all-out war. There's an offer made to not put too much pressure from Wrecking Crew. They make an offer to Providence. Providence refuses the offer. Why did you refuse the offer, Kyle? Why was that offer refused?
I think that that little timeline's a little pretty skewed. I mean, there's been a lot of stuff that's been going on back and forth. I mean, why would our leadership not want to side with a group that's trying to kill Wrecking Crew? It's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I mean, everybody in EVE knows this. And one time, you could be fighting on the sidelines of somebody one day, and then the next day, you'll be bitter enemies. It happens in EVE all the time. I think they're trying to, I would hate to say that they're looking too far into it, but I think that there's been problems before the Keep Start, because when I look at the conflict, I look at the entire year. I'm a history nerd, so I try to take the entire conflict into scope, and I've kept up with all the battles, trying to do the histories and stuff like that, wins, losses, who's sided on whose side. And you look at it, this has been a war for the entire time. And we've had several different engagements. We've had the Spectre fleet saying that they're going to purge Providence with RC's backing and all this other stuff. We've had a lot of different groups that have come in on their side trying to say they're going to destroy all of Providence.
So you actually have been worried about RC. It's never been like, don't worry, guys, they're not going to take anything.
No, you look at it, Providence it's our home. It's who we are. To say that, this is a very big deal for me. Now, also, the only deal that our leadership was given, and this is coming straight from our EQ, is that they were given a no cloaky camping deal. And at the time, I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, I know, Sado, your guys were cloaky camping a lot of the South at the time. I want to say that. But it was just, at the time, it wasn't anything to do about, us versus them or any type of anger. It was mainly like, no, we don't want to deal with this because ultimately, not that we just don't trust you guys. Well, that's just me personally saying this. Because, I mean, even with this nip in place, we still have people habitually violating it from your side, which we're giving over to...
we'll get to that in a second.
Gian.
But so you're saying that the reason it was turned down initially was because you don't trust RC?
No, I did not say that.
Okay,
I said
so what's
personally... I said the only reason was the deal was just no cloaky camping. That was it.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, our leadership said no. That was the only deal that we were given.
For whatever reason, aren't you part of leadership? Would you know why they said no?
I can ask. No, they just said no.
Okay, so they said no.
Yeah, because it's. I would hate to use the phrase "we don't negotiate with terrorists," but
but you're not giving in to your enemy to get to make any kind of a truce because
because ultimately Providence is ours. That's I mean it's in our bloodline, it's in our legacy. I know of course nowhere in all is it someone's, but for our genre, our legacy, our belief system, this is our home, and we won't stop until we get our home back.
Got it.
Negotiating with terrorists, even if you're having a lot of trouble with them, is actually really respectable, and it harkens back to the roots of Providence, right? Back to Operation Deliverance back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, Operation Deliverance, that's our very goal and founding. It's our stated objective. We're taking, and there's a lot of lore behind this as well, which I know it doesn't really mean much to Rocket or Sado, but the lore has us. We're the guardians of Providence. I mean, we take that very seriously through NRDS.
The knighthood where you recognize as the wardens of Providence by the Empress Katiz.
Yeah, the Empress of, I understand, guys, this is a video game and all that, but it means something to us. It actually means something to us that when you join Providence, you become a Paladin Warden. I know people laugh about it, but you know what? For us, it means something to us. It's something we've done this. We've worked for 15 years building this area up, giving a place for people to come in and live as neutrals. Now the war and Blackout was pretty much, it did in the last of the neutrals. The PL invasion hurt a lot of our neutrals that used to live in there, gate camp, stuff like that. And then a lot of them fled. Thousands of people fled. With Blackout, that probably was the final nail in the coffin to a lot of different neutral groups, just because they just didn't have that ability to know who was around there. So you got to look at it like that. We want our home back. And, as Rocket says, oh, it's not about Sov. Well, it is about Sov. And the reason why they actually started going after Sov there was another reason why, which he's not alluding to, which I'll say more respectfully, though, was that if you try going and entoasing Sov, that final timer, if you win, goes more towards the U.S. time zone instead of hitting, citadels and, grinding through that, which is more along a time zone tank. When you try going for Sov, you could try to get that fight more along the U.S. time zone. That was what was the original switch when the Blackout ended, and they found, hey, we could get fights that's more in our favor instead of the EU favor, because Provi Bloc's very strong EU. We could get fights that are more in our favor if we try to do this. And guess what? They're going to try to commit more. And of course, they're going to tell the world, like, hey, listen, it's over Sov. Provi Bloc loves their Sov. So they're going to drop caps and let's go kill their caps. That's the broadcast that's put out to a lot of different groups. So you have that issue that's going on. And then, of course, I would also allude to, it's not that they ramped up things. They also got a lot more groups to join Wrecking Crew. I mean, you look at Sado and his groups that have just recently joined, very cap heavy, very, they know what to do. I mean, they know their job, they know what to do, they know how to drop caps. Get on Sado. I knew of him in Legacy before he came to Wrecking Crew. Now you have a lot of other groups, and you have the French guys.
Deep Space Alliance.
Deep Space Alliance.
Yeah, I mean, so something that RC has done a hell of a lot better than Provi is essentially understanding the value in these smaller groups and actually working with them to build them up. Whereas Providence tends to have a more black and white, okay, either you're here to shoot us or you're here to shoot RC approach, which of course isn't exactly ideal for making any sort of friends or allies.
Yeah, I mean, you get hardly competent DSA.
Yeah, which is something that's heavily disputed within, but of course it's down to leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I just talking with DSA, or not DSA, but hardly competent guys. I was having a great conversation with them. I was like, wow, I mean, you guys sound a lot like, you'd be more pro Provi, but they're like, yeah, they're friends. We don't like the toxic gameplay that's going on, but you know what? Hey, it's content for us. So a lot of groups, it's content. For Wrecking Crew, it's a lot of different groups, but it depends. Each different alliance in Wrecking Crew has a different set objective for Provi. A lot of them is just, it's just holding out as long as we can.
Just to piggyback off that, I mean, I agree massively on of course with RC having, of course, with the different levels of alliances ranging from like low sec allies up to like subholders and of course like the original RC groups. Of course, they do have multiple different objectives, which I think a lot of people within Providence sort of mistake, because obviously they see RC going for Sov, but correct me if I'm wrong, Rocket, but I'm assuming a lot of the stuff regarding Sov is most likely to do with groups like TRC being more sovereignty based in terms of their operations. So I think for a lot of people, Providence is sort of it's sort of different or not exactly easy to sort of differentiate between saying, oh, grr, RC, they want our solve, and being able to understand, okay, there's a hell of a lot of different layers within RC that want, like they each want their different sort of
we have both parties here, so we can get to the bottom of it as long as everybody's talking in good faith, and don't say what you can't say, but don't say what is clearly not the truth, and then we'll get to it quicker. So we can let people define themselves instead of defining each other, which isn't working out.
Yeah, I mean, it's just purely speculation.
I got you. Hold on. Let me move it along here. So, because we're running out of time, I want to get to what's going on today, because Provi, you were offered a non-cloaking. You turned it down because you don't negotiate with your enemies who are taking over your territory. That makes sense.
I wouldn't exactly say we turned it down. I mean, in terms of that decision, that's something you'd need to talk to someone like Equinox about.
He's the one that made the decision. Okay.
Right.
That said,
today's developments, though.
Yeah, a few weeks.
Last few days.
Oh, hold on. Let me get to it. Rocket X. So a few days pass, or not a few days, a few weeks pass, and we're back at the table with Villy involved. How did that come about? We'll start with Rocket X.
So basically, we'd been at a point where we knew we were pushing buttons and pushing them big time, and that Provi wasn't in a good way internally, and that although we controlled a minority of the systems in the region, like I say, they were their line members are genuinely concerned, and morale was kind of a shit show, unfortunately. So we knew that kind of I mean, we don't want to kick Provi out. That was never kind of our end game. But I'd understand why they would obviously think otherwise, given what's happened, especially recently. So now it's kind of like, well, we put their faction fort into like structure last week, and it's the old outpost, the old 9UI outpost, and I'm sat there like, well, I'm not going to be responsible for blowing up some history right there. So we just didn't even form for it. But it was a point where basically we had the decision. It's like, well, if we keep pushing, then Provi will completely fracture and go its own way, and they will leave before the region falls, because we won't toast. We'll just kill them and shoot them, and they've been like I say, the morale's at a point where they're just fracturing. So we were like, well, I mean, in future, we don't really want to just have an empty region next to us, and Provi are a good opponent. So we needed to kind of dial back. So this was really to give them some breathing space. I approached Villy basically because the last conversation I had with EQ directly was the conversation I had with him the morning after the Kamal Keepstar repaired.
That was the last time before this time.
Like nearly a year and a half ago now.
Yeah.
That wow. I've still not had a conversation with EQ since that point. But I mean, I have had conversations with FC teams and some of the other leadership in CBA. And from what I've seen, there's been a lot of conflict internally, even with the way they've dealt with the NIP. I had no idea what CBA is doing. There's rumors of them completely folding into like Test or Legacy. Severance is doing exactly that from what we know. So Severance is going to join Legacy and go do World War B, where I don't know what they're doing with their space. I don't know if they're anchoring it, leaving, or what. But from what we've been told, they're going to merge into Test from Severance. The other side of it is the Red Alert group, from what I can tell. And the intel that we've been given just says that they're kind of moving out heavy assets and kind of keeping their combat ships and routing ships in the region, and trying to see what happens in the next few days.
Is that true? How much of that is true, Kyle?
We're looking at all options right now. I mean, ultimately, Provi is our home. It's always going to be ingrained with us. But we've been offered from a lot of different groups. We have to. Honestly, Provi Bloc needs a coming to Jesus moment, if you will. We need to see what's to our advantage. What's our future going to be? even the guys across from me, they know that I love Providence. I love Provi Bloc. I've only known Providence. I've only killed people in the service of CVA. If it was my choice, I'd fight you guys tooth and nail until I had nothing left in me. But ultimately, we got to make what's best for Provi Bloc, and we're having this discussion. Severance, a lot of us, CVA, APOC, a lot of the holders, we need to have this discussion because the tables are turned. Legacy's semi-blued, Wrecking Crew. So a lot of that additional aid, because like I said, as the tables have turned, you guys are now in favor, have the numbers. The play style is also against us as well because we love subcat fights. We like to do that, and traditionally, we could win 9 out of 10 subcat fights, but with Wrecking Crew, you guys always go to the escalation. You always want to do escalations, and that's one of our failures. We were probably one of the last of the large coalitions to start pushing super caps, and it's a little too late.
Well, that's interesting. So you're making a point that's very interesting here about Provi always did subcaps. You probably didn't do supers because you didn't want to attract the attention, but that's not worked out in the long run because now you're not able to out-escalate your enemy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because our enemy, they're very, very risk averse. Nothing against Rocket X or any of his coalition, but their main strength is they want to play to their escalation. Our main strength is subcap fights because we're very, we're a skirmishy based, coalition. We love doing subcaps, small game. Whereas we play to our strengths, they're trying to play to theirs, which is the escalation game.
If I could just interject, one of the main issues, of course, as Carl said, we've sort of fallen behind to a point where it's not super viable to catch up in our current point in terms of supers and titans. We have had multiple efforts to try and push for them. However, obviously, in our sort of position where, Providence isn't exactly the most viable region for mass rock wool mining and all that fun stuff. One of the problems has always been we'll get a decent amount of supers and titans, and then, of course, you've got to essentially wait until you've got an opportunity to use them. And, I won't deny RC is incredibly intelligent when it comes to using their supers and titans strategically. So, like, the second we max form for, like, supers and titans and finally have enough to actually use them, RC already know that we're already about to use them and just go, fuck it, let's not form. Which, of course, ends up in people getting frustrated and either selling their supers or titans and going to join a group that actually have the capability to use them regularly.
Yeah, it is frustrating. The thing is like we'll go out there, we'll fight on the field, and originally, as I talked to Spartan, which he runs about 95% of your guys' fleets, the last Spartan, brilliant dude. His original set when we sat down and talked about the fights in Vegas was that he is typically running fleets with less people than what Provi can bring to the field. So that's why he drops the escalations. He tries to go for that because that is his force equalizer. That's understandable. I understand that. Now with you guys tipping the balance with the numbers on some of the things, they continue to do that. So when as soon as we break them, we start killing them. Instantly drop everything we have, drop more, faxes, drop more, dreads, and they, knowing that, they have about 50 to 20, 50 dreads to 20 some titans on standby ready to go in if we escalate. They're like, why didn't you drop your 30, 40 dreads? Well, because I know that you have 22 titans in your hangar with about 50 guys, dreads and faxes and stuff like that. So it's like, just because that their ability to out escalate us, it's also destroying our content, and a lot of content's being destroyed because they just immediately want to go to that escalation. Even when they're totally outnumbering us, they'll still hit that escalation button. What? And afterwards, it's just like, okay, now it's no longer becoming fun content. It's just being, I want to hit the I win button and smash these guys.
Elise, isn't that what PL always does?
I think
defend yourself.
Sure. I think Kyle would probably believe that that's what PL does. I think a lot of people on the receiving end would probably see that. There is something to be said where if you're losing a fight already and you just end up losing it harder, did the quote unquote I win buttons actually make a difference? A lot of the times, and I don't say this as a neutral party, I'm not involved with Wrecking Crew or anyone like that. A lot of people like to use the bigger ships, number one. Number two, if you're winning already, the bigger ships let you win faster, and it lets you gain momentum as well in terms of narrative, right? So you already see from what Kyle is saying, they have this, I don't want to say defeatist mentality, because that's kind of rude, but it's I struggle with kind of coming up with a flowery way of saying it, right? My intention is not to mean disrespect. That's why I said it like that.
I imagine, in addition to what you've just said, another thing obviously is even if you say you got 2 dread bombs brawling out, if you drop 20 supers at range, you're dealing with a hell of a lot less SRP payouts when you lose a hell of a lot less dreads. So, I mean, if the fight's already won, it's more about reducing the impact that it has on your economy.
With escalating like that, I think that one of the biggest ways to win over an opponent in a protracted war is to demoralize them. People are going to run out of enthusiasm a lot faster than ISK. And if you do have an advantage and you keep pressing it, a lot of people will be demoralized. And that's probably the best way to win a long, drawn-out fight.
Well, whilst I do agree with that, it's a hell of a lot more difficult in terms of a purely defensive war against a group like RC that's constantly building up and snowballing. Because obviously for them it becomes to a point where it's like, okay, well, if Provi isn't going to fight, then we're just going to sit Titans on everything, hit everything until they're forced to do something.
Sedo, can you weigh in on this? You provided me with this thing that we're looking at here. Sedo. Somebody
doesn't look like he's in channel.
Somebody wake him up. Oh, he's not in channel. I see him in channel.
Oh, he is. Oh shit.
Did you forget how to use your mic, mate? Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
All right, sorry, I hit the wrong button. So like that fight I linked was like one of the first ones post Dread Bomb creation of the Alliance. Because I came over to RC and joined Rocket and Purple Under Warriors, and just as like my own thing, I left Test. I had an all corp in Test I took with me just so I can keep all my tunes on the same corp. And then I went to Few, and then a couple people, buddies from Test, started to come join me because I took like a month and a half off the game, and then came back, and people saw I was back, and people joined me, and then I was like, it'd be cool. Like, one thing on my to-do list is to make and take an attempt at making an alliance that fits certain standards and that fits a certain culture and ideals behind it. And so I got word from a couple of buddies that they were looking for a new home, and that's when Dreadbomb was founded along with TSK. Those were the 2 founders of Dreadbomb, the 2 main corps in it. But pretty much that's the first fight post Dreadbomb creation that was linked there. And the reason, why would I've run most of I think in the past 5-6 months I've been there for most of the times we've dropped supers and Titans. But why would we sit there, especially post ore changes, and trade 1.9 bill for just the whole dreads for other dreads when we can get the escalation to happen? They can drop their 20 dreads on our 15 dreads or whatever, and then just drop an instant delete the rest of those dreads with Titans and supers, or drop supers at range and just boat fighters over. It don't make sense just to sit there and slowly punch back and forth when you can just land an ending blow that quickly. If you know and have the intel that you can drop them and get off safely, then do it. There's no reason not to do it, unless you just want to sit there and have to replace more dreads on your end, post ore changes, making dread holes. Dreads used to be 900 mil. If you think about it, a year ago, dreads, you could buy a hole for 900 mil. Now it's about $1 billion more. And T2 guns, especially with the buff, are even more expensive. It's about $4 to $5 bill to properly fit a T2 dread. Why would I waste that when I can just drop Titans and delete yours and not have to trade mine for yours?
Oh, interesting. So I think it's the game mechanics, it sounds like, that have just made certain ships more viable and certain strategies more viable. This is something that Providence
Don't get me wrong. The dread is the superior capital right now, period. It's just expensive. At our size, at our content level, we don't have to worry about a 300-man dread bomb coming out from the hostile. If in the Goon War, that's happening right now, if one side was to drop Titans, okay, they have to be wary that they might get counter dropped by 300 dreads, and 300 dreads will probably kill up to 10 to 20 Titans before they're all dead with the new changes.
As well.
And very quickly, especially with fax nerfs and how the T2 damage was. If you drop a Titan fleet against a big entity, that has maybe 200 or 300 left, you could lose 10 to 20 Titans very easily before you clear all those dreads. And that's not worth it. But at our level, when it's 50, less than 100-man dread bombs happening and dread brawls happening, and you have the intel to know that you can safely do this and that no one else is there behind the scenes, go ahead and do it so you don't have to waste your dreads over it.
Yeah,
The game mechanics lean on our side for that instead of having to dread brawl it out.
It's just a lot more economical over time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but it's interesting because it does have to do with mechanics and strategy and essentially getting overwhelmed by not an invading force, but almost like an occupying power in your section of the world. It seems to me that's what's going on here. The reaction has been, I believe Equinox, the leader of CVA, reached out to Vili to ask for some negotiating intervention. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. And then what did that result in? Rocket X, you're the one that was on the other side of that negotiation.
Well, a lot of that's between me and Vili. But like, Vili's interest really is trying to keep the conflict in Providence stable, and right now it isn't. And as EQ wouldn't talk to me, the only way that we have like this mutual connection is with Vili. And Vili's someone that I trust his word for sure. He's been solid through every dealing I've had with him throughout years now. Same with ProGod. So I knew that going to them, I could talk to them in confidence and know that that they would make it clear and be a mediator of sorts.
Mm-hmm. How EQ has talked to me before he's talked to you, Rocket. He reached out to me about 2-3 months ago, offering to pay me to come over to CVA side.
Yeah, that was when we told everyone that you'd been kicked from Few for losing a Titan.
Yeah, exactly.
See, that Titan op was actually amazing.
Oh, it was. So here's the best part, right? So we got intel about the fucking trigger happy dreads like 3 hours before, and then I see Mika ping for a Titan kill for a carrier kill. I'm like, where's this carrier? And he's like, oh, YOP. And I was like, oh, it's fine. He knows about the dread intel. He's got that information. He's just going to ping subcaps. And then there's a ping like 3 minutes later that's like Titan tackled, and I'm sat there like eating dinner, just full on face palming into my soup, right? And it was a fucking rag, so I knew there was nothing we could do to do anything about it. So it was just like, well, GG. And I mean, Meeks just flat up forgot. He just straight up spaced it, and that was it. But it did make for some good memes when Sedo left Few to, of course, form Dreadbomb.
But
got a lot of offers to go to places because people got kicked.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. So people thought you were a free agent again. And they're like, snatch him up. We know he's good, including
it
CVA.
Was just to make an entity inside of that would be it made my own entity and alliance that is a part of Wrecking Crew, but can do its own thing on the side as well.
Okay,
Wrecking Crew is a content.
This is one of the
things, not like a set coalition.
Like, I mean, one of the things that Wrecking Crew does, I think, really well is when someone comes in, we basically give them the opportunity. Like, okay, you've got our backing. Here's all our firepower. What are you going to do with it? You're going to make a name for yourself and do the FC thing. You're going to lead your own group, and I honestly try my best to try and give everyone that kind of joins us that opportunity and pay attention to what they want. So TRC wanted Sarv, the French guys in the domain pocket wanted Sarv. There's a group that we just installed in GTAC 5. Sedo wanted to play escalation games at a level that wasn't like test and hundreds of capitals, right? And it's a completely different kind of gameplay to get into, and you have a whole new things you have to be aware of. And when you give people that pedestals to stand on, a podium to shout from, it's important that you make sure that those people, not only when they're leading your fleets, but like I said earlier, that they also have kind of a controlling interest in the direction of a group. And like our kind of command team and that controls Wrecking Crew's content direction is full of the fleet commanders. And I barely make a decision content wise in terms of politics and direction without talking to them first, because I can go and do what I want to do, but if I'm fucking half my guys out of content, or I'm screwing them over with something they wanted to do that they now can't, then there's an issue there. And I think that kind of transparency and communication and the opportunities that we afford to our members and the member alliances is kind of what makes us what we are.
The way that it works is like, I can pick up Dread Bomb and move to fucking, like, we did a joint deployment in with Volta and Hakonin, and for a while in the US time zone before Isred left them. And we were up there for some timers, but like Wrecking Crew content was still there. Wrecking Crew's weird. It's not like it's a content group. I want to call it a coalition. It's a content group that everyone's like a part of, and like you're allowed to do your own things. Like I left Test to get out of the tie-dye fights, to get out of the big political donut, to avoid all that stuff, and to enjoy the sub 100, sub 300 man fights that are a lot more about strategy and player skill instead of, okay, who has the most numbers.
Yeah, it's a very interesting group. It's not quite a coalition. It's not quite an alliance. It's somewhere in between.
I think it's for people that are in larger groups, it's kind of like a SIG, right? A special interest group that exists within a coalition. But the format is, from when Rocket talks about the format, it makes me smile and really happy, because it's definitely a winning formula and a tried and true formula to keep.
A lot different coming from a structured group.
Well,
I was very confused.
It's like you said with like the kind of the mechanics and the kind of escalation path we use. It's very PL-esque, and well, I mean, I spent 3 years in PL, so I'm homegrown. What can I say?
I mean, it's a winning formula, right? When you do it right, to keep the people that create the content happy, and just give them everything they want. It ends up having a really good experience for everyone involved.
So okay,
it's important as well, because you can never make everyone happy, right? But you have to talk to those people and be like, look, this is going to happen. It's going to be shit for a while, but here's what we're doing next, and kind of be open and talk about it. And again, those content groups and those FCs, have to be willing to roll with the punches sometimes for us to do what we do. And like everyone in RC, I have to say, has been fantastic with it for the last 2 years at least.
So, okay, so it's neat. It's a neat group to look at. It's interesting. It's kind of interesting because it's an evolution, right? The SIG is an evolution of how to keep people active, keep them interested, and at the same time keep their responsibilities lower. And what you have in contrast is one of the oldest groups in the game, Providence, that this region is their home. Flows through their blood, kind of thing. So there's a contrast between the new and the traditional, which is interesting here as well. But the latest part of this is that the NIP, Billy came in and brokered an NIP really quickly. And what does that mean for CVA? What does that mean for Providence, Kyle? What's going to happen next?
Honestly, the NIP really helps Wrecking Crew right now, to be honest. I mean, they just got a huge swath of SOF, low ADMs, and so they have now a breathing room to start building that up. Try to, of course, you guys have spawned multiple different alt alliances to get that capital bonus for each system. So I mean, it's really helping you guys.
You don't see it as helping you?
It helps us. In fact, it gives us room. Where I see it helps us is it gives us room to determine what we want to do with our own coalition.
And that's where you're at now.
Yeah. I don't see it as honestly. That's what the NIP's helping us do. I don't foresee it because if it's a 2-month thing, I don't foresee a long run. If we stayed in Provi and we kept fighting, I don't foresee that actually a good thing for us. Listen, and be careful. I'm not saying it was a bad idea. I'm saying that it's helping RC consolidate their recent gains while they build up their ADMs. Now, the big thing with Provi is we have a lot of soft, right? Well, with Wrecking Crew, they used to traditionally have a lot of not as much soft, so they could concentrate their player base within a small section. What this NIP's allowed them to do is give them a breathing room, but now they have a lot more space to spread out with, and then now they have to struggle with the ADMs and stuff like that. So it really helps both parties, and it's not really as one-sided as some of them are saying, very respectfully so.
Well, I think what we want to get to here at the end, because we got to wrap up, is the question: where is CVA? Where is the future for CVA? Is this the end of Provi Bloc? Is this where you
Provi Bloc? Not as a sort of coalition within Providence. I mean, I can tell you for a fact now that regardless of what happens to whoever, I mean, Red Alert is going to sort of be that sort of entity to rebuild and sort of modernize and revitalize the whole idea of being an NRDS entity within Providence.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to figure out if because Providence is weighing their options within this 2-month period where they have a breather basically to say, what do we actually want to do? We're seeing freighters leave Providence. Now, that could be just moving non-essential assets out in case, worst case scenario. But we're also hearing that people are leaving. Do you want to answer any of that, Kyle?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could say that we do a lot of commerce. I mean, look, it's a very heavy industry group. So, I mean, if someone sees a jump freighter, they're gonna see, writings on the wall. Oh my gosh, they're jumping out. I mean, however, yes, there are people jumping non-essential items out of Providence. It's just how it goes. As far as what is CVA going to do, I mean, that's decision is going to be made in a little while. Ultimately, Providence is always going to be our goal. Wherever we go, if we choose to go out, or retreat, fall back, go anywhere, ultimately, this is our home. We will reclaim it one day. And as Oralis, one of the founding members, one of our founding fathers of CVA, always said, CVA has never lost a war. We've either in the process of winning the war or we've already won the war. We play the long game. And Provi Bloc, the future Provi Bloc that I'm seeing that's going to be happening, there's going to be some restructuring of leadership. We're going to be restructuring modernization of our tactics and how we do things. That's going to happen regardless of where we go. We're going to see a more revitalized Provi in the future. Now, will we fracture and go our own separate ways? The Arabic term, inshallah, if God wills it. I would love for us to stay together because we're a family. I'd give my shirt off my back for anyone here in Provi Bloc. But if we're going to move forward, we have to do it collectively. Some guys already said that they'll stay behind no matter what. Yeah, I've heard the Red Alert guys. Now, I'll always fight for my region. I mean, if that means that I have to stay behind or get kicked out of my own group to fight Rick and Crew to reclaim my home, I'll always fight to reclaim Providence because.
So if CVA, the group that you belong to, decides they want to move to Legacy and join this World War B Part 2 effort, will you stay in Providence and fight whoever the remainers are? Instead of the holders, you'll be the remainers.
It's a funny way to put it. I mean,
both biblical, right?
You're asking my personal views to what I do. I'll live and die for CVA. You cut me, I'll have black and gold blood, and I'm going to stand by them no matter what. Say we go, because I know we were offered great opportunities from a lot of different coalitions. I think wherever we go, the ultimate goal, no matter where we go, is Providence, and it will change. I don't know how NRDS is going to change in the future, but I mean, this could be one of the last great bastions of NRDS, and it's true.
Yeah, that's it's very true, somewhat troubling and interesting, because I think the theme that's been going through this whole thing is that CVA was traditional, and people like former FCs that were mentioned wanted to modernize the military or the strategy or even the type of ships that you use to keep it competitive with what's been going on. And it hasn't really been a problem until recently. And now it seems like Wrecking Crew, which is one of the most modern groupings of players there is, has really been able to win you on the battlefield, basically. And so now you have some soul searching. Is that a fair assessment of what's been going on?
I think
just
yeah. I mean, I don't want Provi to failscade or collapse or get evicted or anything like that. It's not. It was never my end goal. I realize that that might be the way that it ends up, and it
Well,
might be the way. That
this is
Provi
really
goes
bad for you, Rocket X, because you're going to inherit space you may not want. You're going to inherit leadership roles you're not going to want. This doesn't really fit into your plans, as you've been saying.
It's not ideal, but I mean, the thing is, we're in a controlling position here, and we have a hell of a lot of options and a hell of a lot of things that we can do. We're pretty good with wormholes, so we can get pretty much anywhere, any time of day. It's not like it's not like not being able to be in Provi anymore is going to stop like Spartan and Sedo and our escalations and that sort of thing. We'll find a way to do it as we always have before. On our side, I think, I mean, as you noticed in the NIP agreement, we've limited it to like Astras and Athanors, and it's really just because we want to create timers that don't really matter to either side, and we're planning to do things like roll out Hurricanes and Feroxes and Drakes, and just give our kind of more junior FCs a bit of a shot at going and getting some content. It'll also be more fightable and more fun for Provi. So even if we outnumber them, we're going to be flying fairly killable and expendable ships, just for fun fights, really. I mean, whether Provi stays in Provi and like wants to play that game or not, like I don't know. That's really up to them. But we'll see, right?
So you're willing to kind of throttle down your capability.
The other thing is as well, obviously, we're not going to be max performing for these timers. And the thing is, I can't turn around and be like, okay, we're not doing anything in Provi for the next week. What realistically the kind of way that it has to go is that we change the way that we form. We don't ping as hard, we just go for kind of casual fights and fun. So instead of forming 250 guys and 120 man cap fleet and a 60 man toaster wing, we'll form 100 guys and go see what happens, and have some fun. And I think, I mean, a lot of the thing is as well that even though we outnumber them, like we also outship them quite a lot, so we'll tend to fly more expensive doctrines. And that plays an impact as well, but it's something we've been able to do because we have like group wide SRP, and probably never has. So it's meant that if one alliance that's puts a lot of numbers in fleet goes and dies defending someone else's space, their wallets run out pretty quickly if they don't have some kind of unified SRP in place. But I mean, RC has always done that since we started doing this and kind of look after everyone to the same degree.
Got it. What Bale and Elise, what do you two think of this as third partiers looking at it from the outside?
Well, I know Arcia has flown with Pi before and has a lot of ties to CVA, so she's probably better suited to
Arcia,
kind of looking at this.
Should we just call her Arcia instead of Baleful?
I mean, either way, it's fine with me.
Okay.
I've been on the same side as Kyle in a lot of fights in the low-sec war zone, but I've never really seen his fights in all. It does sound to me like with the lack of the supers and the lack of the some of the maybe tactics that have been utilized by RC, that it is an issue with like maybe adapting to where things have gone as opposed to where they once were. And harkens back to the issue of morale, that the big losses seeming to be outnumbered with the Titans and Supers just drive away people from showing up to the pings, whereas the high morale RC gets a lot of people joining in on it because they see that the kills are happening.
I mean, from a neutral perspective, like I have skirmished quite a bit, quite extensively over my time at Eve in Providence. Never with the intention, as kind of similar to Rocket, we never have the intention of saying, "Oh, this is our home now," right? So we've done a lot of attacking, and when you attack someone, you kind of get to know them a little bit. My vibe from Providence has always been that they are a storied and very proud group of alliances living in the region of Providence, which they care about more than anyone else, right? When you could put stations down, they put stations all over the place, even when it didn't make economic sense. So when the stations swapped to faction citadels, that was the best place to go to get faction citadels, because these people just created value out of nothing. But they're also very much, in my view, and this is again probably wrong, this is an outsider's view, they were very much stuck in that history as well, and sort of stuck in their old ways. So they didn't want to, as they mentioned before, they didn't want to adapt to super carriers and having big dread fleets and stuff like that. They didn't want to, or they didn't see a need to do that. As Eve changed, they changed a little bit, right? But they never took big sweeping changes. So it does sound from the outside in that they are taking this time to make those changes, right, and to come up into the next decade to ensure that they last in Providence as a region for a little bit longer.
What I would say, and I think Elise will agree, is that the best way to get Provi to fight you is make them think they're being invaded, whether you are invading them or not, right? So that's really kind of how this started for us, and obviously it's evolved into what we see today.
So the one thing I did want to say about Providence is I remember when I was a newer player, and I've been an RPer since I started playing the game. I made my character with the intention of RPing, and I heard about Providence and how it was like NRDS space, and that was like one of the first things that kind of got me to go outside of my comfort zone and like go into null. And I got like blapped in a bubble camp by some pirates at some like 2 jumps in or something stupid, but I think that Providence, like as like a kind of an RDS region, even if sometimes you still get blopped, is like good for the game. They're like a smaller group than some of the major coalitions and alliances, and they do things that maybe aren't for like the in-game reasons. Maybe they have like in-character reasons, and you don't see that kind of stuff elsewhere. And I think if Providence does kind of fall, that would be a loss for the game as a whole.
I will say, I think before groups like Commerfleet, Horde, and Brave, Providence was where a lot of players got their start, and which was absolutely a good thing. And it still exists in some capacity today, not as much as it did before, because there are other avenues for people to get their starts. But there are a lot of big names, FCs, industrialists, people like that have started in Provi and gone through Provi, and use that as a stepping stool to continue going on. Not to say that Providence is a low bar, right? But Providence is a medium-sized block. Some people want more. Some people go up from that. Some people go down from that. Some people stay there. But Providence has seen a lot of talent go through it through the years. I think if you pull those threads, you'll find people from all walks of life in huge areas. In very, I'm rambling here. Sorry, trying to find my point. You'll find people who are very impactful in like the nullsec wars right now. There are industrialists on both sides of the conflict that got their start in Providence. There are FCs that got their start in Providence. There are scouts that got their start in Providence. So Providence, has seen a lot of talented people go through it. And hopefully when they make whatever changes, they will be able to retain more of that talent rather than letting it go.
Kyle, you get the last word on this, I suppose. I just want to see if we can't bring everybody up to speed on Providence and where it's going next, because I think you're in real flux right now, and the options are not just A or B, but you have basically A or Z, it seems like.
Yes, there's going to be a lot of options for us, and I mean, it's hard to say where we're going to go. I mean, we're having meetings with leaderships right now. What is going to be our direction? And I'd hate to see a fracture. I know, like Elise said, that Providence ultimately is going to be. It has been the stepping stone of a lot of different organizations and groups and people to move on and do greater, bigger, and better things. And if Provi fractures, unfortunately, it's going to suck. But I know Provi will live on in the hearts and souls of all the players that have been in it. And ultimately, I think that our ultimate goal is to reclaim our home. And if who knows if we ever do it or not. It's take it as a sense of pride of everything we've accomplished over the years. But ultimately, moving forward, I hope that there is going to be a Providence. I hope that my kid will one day inherit a Providence. because it's what it's become now. It's a generational thing where we've been around for 15 years, and so well, that's a question I have to ask. Will my kid one day see a Providence or a Provi Bloc or a CVA? And those are some very tough questions, and I can't answer that question.
So the future is very much in doubt right now, but you guys are having leadership meetings about it.
Yeah, right now, yes. I couldn't tell you if, which direction we're going to go, but ultimately that we're stubborn people, and that we will continue to fight, regardless if we fracture or not. I think that if it takes 4 to 5 years for us to reclaim Providence, we're going to be there. But it's our duty. It's our way of life. It's our ethos. It's ingrained in every single one of us.
Okay. Well, thanks, Kyle, very much. Thank you guys for showing up, Gian, Rocket X. Sado had to quietly leave earlier, and thanks for talking about this interesting and urgent situation in Providence. We'll be watching it over the next 2 months. It sounds like a lot of decisions are going to be made in the near future, so we'll know more about the future of CVA and its holders, its alliances, the holders, and we'll see what happens there. Right now, we're going to switch over to a little bit of news because a lot has happened in EVE Online besides the war and besides the Providence, we'll call it a war, the conflict. Elise, what's been going on in the news?
So a big feature that was launched last week, which kind of got off running on Thursday, is kind of the iteration of the Abyssal Proving Grounds, which was like a secret room, not a secret room, an optional room doing level 3 Abyssal sites or higher, where you could go through after doing the PvE, and then you could meet another player, and you would fight to the death, take their loot, take some extra stuff from the cache, and then leave. So they iterated on this feature because it got a little bit stale, but it was quite popular. So now you and a friend, as it stands right now, can activate a filament and go directly into a proving ground environment. So you're in a little tournament arena, and you get to fight another group of 2 players. So CSB did a big event yesterday. I was very happy to be involved as well. I was flying with CSB Convict. We ended up losing quite a bit early, but then winning towards the end. So you're able to activate a filament. The wait time, because these things are so popular, they're a big flash in the pan right now. The wait time's about 10 seconds. And then 10 seconds later, you're fighting someone else. And then you fight to the death. There's a little bit of a timer in case there's a stalemate. Everyone dies. It's a good way to have a stalemate. And then you can just go right after that. And the format is something that seems to be mentioned that they can change quite a bit. So right now, it's 2v2 cruisers. That's the rules for entry. But after this, it's going to be a 5-person destroyer free-for-all. So instead of going in with a team of 2, you activate a filament, you meet 4 other people, you look around, and you start killing. And that's going to be limited to destroyer classes. Then after that, it's like, I think it's 2v2s and Imperial Navy slicers, like completely restricted to just a slicer. And they can play with all these little rules and all these little entry types of restrictions to keep the content fresh and to keep it from becoming quite stale. So it has been incredibly popular. They've obviously tied a login campaign for it as well because it's a new feature. You get some alpha skill points for when you go in the first time, I think. A lot of people were flying caracols, so the caracol market in Jita was massacred. So you couldn't really get a caracol for under 20 mil for a while. But yeah, so that's been a big thing, and it's been quite some fun. There are some interesting storylines. Because there is a leaderboard, the top 100 pilots get special prizes at the end of each little phase. So classic EVE players, they decided they wanted to min-max it. TikTok Toxic and Cable Uda came up with a really very strong fit. Abyssal rolled, Pith A-type, faction damage controls, Nirvana implants, talking about 30 billion ISK between their 2 ships. and they racked up quite a win streak.
Was it like 150 wins?
TikTok, I think Cable said that he had 156 kill marks on his ship alone. And then in classic E fashion, that lasted about a day, a day or two. Their rise to the top. They hit the top of the leaderboards. Big target on their back. They got hard countered by very, very tanky and equally as blinged out maulers. So they end up losing their ship, or at least one did. So lots of back and forth. I know there's a lot of some people that didn't really like the idea of instance PvP heading to EVE Online. But from my playing with it, I've played about 30 or 50 matches so far, somewhere in there. They just go by so fast. They're really quick, and it's very additive, right? So you would naturally think, oh, there's going to be less content in LowSec. The people I'm seeing in these things aren't people that would like hang out in LowSec. They're not doing faction warfare plexes or anything like that. So from my early instinct is it's additive, and I'm kind of excited to see what it's going to grow into. You know, all these things, they have a chance of growing into something cool, an extra feature in the game, or they could fizzle out if they're not taken care of properly. I have a hunch that they're going to be iterated on and kept fresh and kept from becoming stale, because no one wants to run into 30 bill cruisers and die every time, right?
Yeah. So they can do that pretty easily by just changing the filaments, which means they change the ships that are allowed into these arenas. They could just change it every 2 weeks.
And they can even change what fittings you can put in there if they really wanted to. They've mentioned that's something they're doing. And CCB Deadlift, I believe he was on part of the team that was implementing these, and he made it a point to say, you know, we're looking at everything. We're looking to see if jumps go down because of this. We're looking to see if PvP becomes more focused here instead of other players. They're very mindful of the impact that this might have, and they definitely want it to become additive and not something that removes action from EVE Online, because that would be the worst part that this feature could do.
What do you think, Baleful? Have you been toying with this at all? Or are you busy fighting for EdenCom?
Well, yeah, I've been fighting for EdenCom. In character-wise, I don't want to be a toy for the triangles amusement, right? I kill triangles. I don't dance for them. It's kind of my thing.
Okay.
But I think as far as an idea on the game side goes, like out of character-wise, I don't have a problem with it. I know some people do have issue with the instance PvP, like Elise mentioned.
They have a theoretical issue,
as someone
though.
who's flown in some of the 2v2 tournaments. I was in the Vegas and the Toronto ones flying alongside Damascus, and 2v2 tournament style is like a really fun
I think you
really
beat
fun
Elise,
format.
didn't you?
So we'd beat Elise in the Amar tournament several years ago. In Vegas, we were second. We lost in the finals. In Toronto, we lost in the semifinals. But
sorry, Elise.
I think it's kind of fun, especially with like the Alliance tournament being gone, and there's not going to be like events for a while because of COVID. So it's kind of like, hey, look, you can have a little tournament style fights here, right?
Yeah. Well, again, the main thing is the people that are playing it are having a great time. We could see that there was a graph released by CCP, over 5,000 instances of people fighting, and that was within the first few hours. And they just want to make sure that it's additive, that the people that are doing it are not being taken off the field for the natural virtual world that's out there and roaming around in the wild. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because roaming is bay.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Elise. I don't know if there's anything else. There's this little thing that I think for people like me is great. And that is, if you look on Spotify now, they have the second album, the second volume of EVE music. So you can listen to now 2 albums on Spotify. Just type in EVE Online, look for Real X, I think it is, or follow him. And you'll get some of those great classic EVE Online songs for you to listen to while you're doing other things.
Oh, also with the slicer filaments, that's for Amar Foundation Day, the slicer tournament. That's why it slices specifically.
Oh.
Yeah, so similar to how there was a Liberation Day for the Minotaur and
The Federation Day.
Federation Day for the Galente, there's one for the Amar, and I'm sure there'll be like cool processions and stuff through Amar.
Expect those to be yearly on the RP Discord as we've been talking, because they have a lot of login bonuses these days. So we kind of expect the 4 Empire themed days to be yearly events now.
I will say something in the vein of 2v2s. There is an event going on right now, actually. It's the 5v5 Scrims, which is a player-run tournament. It's 5v5 with a set of rules, trying to capture like the spirit, at least, of the Alliance tournament or stuff like that. Competitive EVE play, we should put it that way. The finals are going on right now, actually. It's, I think, a 6-week culmination of 10 teams going down to the final 2. I actually believe there's a former Providence captain that is in the finals, Jose Zampano. A big guy. He used to be in Providence. I don't know when he left Providence, or if he is still there. So it's kind of germane to our Providence chat and how they get lots of big names. They don't necessarily always hold on to them. But, talking about Providence, a huge name in the finals, the best of the best, going on right now on the 5v5 Scrims channel.
Oh, awesome. Well, there's a lot of activity, not just the wars, but outside of it as well. Well, let's call it a day. It's been technically a very challenging day, but we're glad that you guys stuck with us. We got up to 425, I think. So we're happy that people showed up. Chat was a little bit ruckus, which happens when passions are high, and Providence definitely brings that out. My God. People want to trigger over Providence. But I just want to say thanks for those of you who stuck around. We are live right now on Eve Echoes on Talking in Station. So that is youtube.com /Talking in Stations, all one word. We'll get you there. And Who's a Fish is talking with people about Eve Echoes. So check that out right now if you can. If not, watch the VOD, which will be on our Talking in Stations YouTube channel. That is going to be all that we have today. Thanks again, Bale, for joining us. Baleful. I'm starting to shorten your name. Thank you, Elise and Rocket. Thanks, guys. All right, we will see you next time on Talking in Stations.